Hello, my friends, and welcome back Storytime History. Tonight, we're traveling to a land of ancient kingdoms, towering mountains, royal palaces, and political storms. We're stepping into the remarkable life of a man who was worshipped by some as a messiah, admired by world leaders, feared by rivals, and ultimately abandoned by the very people he ruled. His name was Haile Selassie. To many Ethiopians, he was the Lion of Judah, the defender of a proud nation that resisted colonial domination. To millions of Rastafarians around the world, he became a living symbol of hope and divine kingship. But to others, he was an aging emperor who could not see the suffering growing around him until it was too late. How does a man rise from a noble child in a remote province to become one of the most famous rulers on earth? And how does that same man lose everything after decades on the throne? Stay with me, because the story is filled with triumph, war, betrayal, survival, and a dramatic ending that still sparks debate today. And before we begin, if you enjoy immersive history stories like this one, don't forget to subscribe and join our growing community. Now settle in and let's begin. The story starts in Ethiopia in the late 19th century. At that time, Ethiopia stood apart from much of Africa. While European powers were dividing the continent among themselves, Ethiopia remained independent. It was an ancient civilization with roots stretching back thousands of years. Its rulers traced their lineage to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, blending history, faith, and legend into a powerful royal tradition. Into this world, a boy named Tafari Makonnen was born in 1892. No one could have imagined just how important this child would become. Young Tafari grew up surrounded by politics and power. His father was a respected governor and military leader. Unlike many children of his era, Tafari received a broad education. He learned about diplomacy, administration, religion, and foreign affairs. He was curious and intelligent, always eager to understand how the wider world worked. Even as a young man, he stood out. Ethiopia was changing rapidly. Modern ideas were entering the country, and ambitious leaders were competing for influence around the imperial court. Tafari proved remarkably skilled at navigating this dangerous environment. Many nobles were stronger, others were richer, some commanded larger armies. But Tafari possessed something equally powerful: patience. He knew when to speak and when to remain silent. He understood that political survival often depended on timing. As years passed, his influence steadily grew. Then came a turning point. In 1916, after a period of political turmoil, Tafari emerged as one of the most important figures in the empire. He became regent and heir apparent to the throne. Though another ruler officially remained empress, many recognized that real power was increasingly moving into Tafari's hands. The young regent immediately began pushing Ethiopia toward modernization. He encouraged education. He sought stronger diplomatic ties with foreign nations. He worked to reduce slavery, which still existed in parts of the country. He believed Ethiopia needed to modernize if it hoped to survive in a world dominated by industrial powers. Not everyone agreed. Conservative nobles feared change. They worried that foreign influences might weaken traditional Ethiopian society. But Tafari pressed forward. The world began paying attention. Foreign diplomats were impressed by the young Ethiopian leader. Newspapers described him as intelligent, sophisticated, and forward-thinking. Gradually, his reputation spread far beyond Africa. Yet greater challenges were approaching. Dark clouds were gathering over Europe. New dictators were rising, and one of them had his eyes fixed firmly on Ethiopia. By 1930, Tafari's journey reached another historic milestone. He was crowned emperor. His new name would become famous across the globe: Haile Selassie I, King of Kings, Lord of Lords, conquering lion of the tribe of Judah. The ceremony was magnificent. Foreign dignitaries traveled from around the world to witness it. The spectacle projected power, tradition, and legitimacy. It symbolized not only the coronation of a ruler, but also the endurance of one of Africa's oldest civilizations. For Haile Selassie, it seemed like the beginning of a glorious new chapter. But just a few years later, everything he had built would face destruction. Because in Italy, A dictator named Benito Mussolini was preparing for war, and Ethiopia was his target. As Haile Selassie settled into his role as emperor, Europe was becoming increasingly dangerous. Across the continent, dictators were gaining power. Among them was Benito Mussolini, the fascist ruler of Italy. Mussolini dreamed of building a new Roman Empire. He wanted colonies. He wanted military glory. And perhaps most importantly, he wanted revenge. Decades earlier, Italy had suffered a humiliating defeat at the Battle of Adwa, where Ethiopian forces crushed an invading Italian army. It was one of the few times an African nation had successfully defeated a European colonial power during that era. Mussolini never forgot it. In 1935, Italy launched a massive invasion of Ethiopia. The scale was overwhelming. Italian forces possessed tanks, aircraft, artillery, and modern weapons. Ethiopian soldiers fought bravely, but many still relied on rifles, swords, and outdated equipment. The war quickly became brutal. Italian aircraft dropped bombs on villages. Poison gas was used against soldiers and civilians alike. Entire communities suffered. Haile Selassie personally traveled among his troops, encouraging resistance. He understood the odds were terrible, but surrender was unthinkable. The emperor faced an impossible dilemma: stay and risk capture, or leave Ethiopia and appeal to the world for help. Eventually, he chose exile. It was one of the most painful decisions of his life. As Italian forces advanced toward Addis Ababa, Haile Selassie departed the country. To some Ethiopians, it felt like abandonment. To others, it was a strategic necessity. The emperor's next move would become one of the most famous moments in international diplomacy. In 1936, he appeared before the League of Nations in Geneva. The world listened as the Ethiopian emperor delivered a powerful speech. He warned that the aggression facing Ethiopia would not stop there. If the world allowed dictators to conquer smaller nations without consequence, larger conflicts would follow. Many delegates applauded. Many newspapers praised his courage. But words alone would not save Ethiopia. The League failed to stop Mussolini. Haile Selassie returned to exile. Yet history would soon prove that his warning had been correct. The world was heading toward a catastrophe far larger than anyone imagined. And when that catastrophe arrived, Haile Selassie's fortunes would change dramatically. World War II transformed everything. As fighting spread across Europe, Africa, and Asia, Italy found itself under immense pressure. British forces began challenging Italian control throughout East Africa. Suddenly, the possibility of liberating Ethiopia became real. For Haile Selassie, the moment he had waited for finally arrived. In 1941, accompanied by Ethiopian patriots and allied forces, he returned home. The image was unforgettable. The emperor who had been driven into exile was coming back. Crowds celebrated. Resistance fighters who had endured years of occupation welcomed him. For many Ethiopians, it felt like a national rebirth. The Lion of Judah had returned. Back on the throne, Haile Selassie became determined to strengthen and modernize the country. Roads were built. Schools expanded. Government institutions grew. Ethiopia increased its engagement with international organizations. The emperor also emerged as a respected global statesman. Leaders from around the world sought meetings with him. He became a symbol of African independence and dignity. When newly independent African nations emerged during the 1950s and 1960s, many viewed Haile Selassie as an elder statesman. He played a major role in promoting African unity. His prestige reached extraordinary levels. Meanwhile, something unexpected was happening thousands of miles away. In Jamaica, a religious movement known as Rastafarianism began viewing Haile Selassie as a divine figure. To followers, his coronation fulfilled biblical prophecy. Songs, prayers, and teachings celebrated him. Although Haile Selassie himself never claimed divinity, his influence spread far beyond politics. He had become a global icon. Yet behind the ceremonies, international praise, and royal titles, serious problems were developing inside Ethiopia. And those problems would eventually threaten the entire empire. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, Ethiopia faced mounting difficulties. The emperor was aging. His government had become increasingly centralized. Many ordinary citizens felt disconnected from the ruling elite. Then came one of the most devastating crises of all: famine. In some regions, severe drought and food shortages caused immense suffering. Thousands died. Many more struggled to survive. Reports began emerging that the scale of the disaster was far worse than officials had admitted. For a nation already experiencing economic challenges, the famine became a symbol of deeper frustrations. Students protested. Workers demanded change. Military officers grew restless. Questions spread across the country. Had the emperor lost touch with reality? Had the government become too slow, too distant, too unwilling to confront the nation's problems? Haile Selassie had ruled for decades. For many younger Ethiopians, he represented the past rather than the future. The respect he had earned through resistance to Italy and international diplomacy was no longer enough to silence criticism. The atmosphere grew tense. Rumors circulated. Confidence weakened. Then events began moving with astonishing speed. In 1974, military officers launched a revolution. The group became known as the Derg. At first, many people did not fully grasp what was happening. After all, Haile Selassie had seemed almost untouchable for so long. Yet the impossible was occurring. The emperor's support network was collapsing. Officials were arrested. Power shifted. The old order was unraveling before everyone's eyes. Then came the moment few thought they would ever witness. Haile Selassie was removed from power. The man who had ruled Ethiopia for decades was suddenly no longer emperor. A simple vehicle carried him away from the palace. No grand ceremony. No glorious farewell. Just an aging ruler leaving behind the throne that had once seemed eternal. The final chapter of Haile Selassie's life was filled with uncertainty. The former emperor was placed under house arrest. His empire was gone. His authority had vanished. The world watched as one of the 20th century's most famous monarchs faded from public view. For someone who had addressed world leaders, survived exile, defeated occupation, and shaped African diplomacy, the contrast was striking. Months passed. Then, in August 1975, news emerged that Haile Selassie had died. Official reports claimed natural causes, but almost immediately questions appeared. Many suspected foul play. Rumors spread that members of the military regime may have been involved. Decades later, debate continues regarding the circumstances surrounding his death. What is certain is that an extraordinary era had come to an end. The emperor who had once stood before the League of Nations, warning the world about the dangers of aggression, was gone. Yet his legacy remains remarkably complex. To some, Haile Selassie was a visionary modernizer who protected Ethiopian independence and elevated Africa's voice on the world stage. To others, he was a ruler who stayed in power too long and failed to address growing social and economic problems. Perhaps both views contain part of the truth. History is rarely simple. Great leaders often leave behind achievements and mistakes intertwined together. What cannot be denied is the scale of Haile Selassie's influence. His life touched international politics, African unity, anti-colonial struggles, religion, and global culture. Few rulers of the 20th century left such a wide-reaching impact. And perhaps that is why his story continues to fascinate people today. It is a story of ambition and survival, of glory and tragedy, of power gained and power lost. A reminder that even the mightiest empires and the most celebrated leaders are not immune to the forces of change. Thank you so much for joining me on this journey through the rise and fall of Emperor Haile Selassie. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear what part of his remarkable life surprised you the most. Until next time, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.